Elena had always imagined childbirth as something sacred, surrounded by love, warmth, safety, but the sterile glare of the hospital lights felt cold, like an interrogation lamp. Sweat clung to her forehead, her hair plastered to her temples. Every contraction cut through her like a tightening chain, pulling her into a world of pain and fear. Yet she did not cry out. She bit her lip, because the pain inside her heart was far worse. Where was Victor? He had promised he would be here. He had sworn that their child would be born into the world with the sound of both parents' voices. But as the minutes dragged on, all she could think of was the rumors, the whispers, the late nights at the office, the perfume that did not belong to her, and the name she had seen flash across his phone screen too many times. Elena. A nurse entered. Tall, graceful, blonde hair in a perfect bun. Elena's breath caught. It was her. Elena's smile was gentle, too gentle. "I'm here to take care of you," she murmured, stepping closer, as if kindness lived inside her voice. But Elena saw it, the flicker of amusement, the hidden delight in her eyes. She had won. She had taken what was Elena's, her husband, her peace, her dignity. Elena tried to speak, tried to tell the other nurses that she didn't want this woman near her, but another contraction ripped the breath from her lungs. She gripped the bed rails so hard her knuckles whitened. Elena leaned over the monitors, watching them beep with mechanical calm. "Don't worry," she said, adjusting the oxygen tank. "This is supposed to help you. Relax." She placed the mask on Elena's face. For a moment, relief washed in as oxygen flowed. But then, slowly, imperceptibly, the airflow weakened. Elena felt her chest tighten again. Her breaths came short. Her vision blurred at the edges, black, creeping inward like ink spreading across paper. She tried to lift her hand, to call out, but her body felt heavy, like a stone sinking to the bottom of cold water. Elena leaned close, her lips almost brushing Elena's ear. Her voice was whisper-soft, almost loving, but every syllable dripped poison. "If you disappear, no one will question it," she breathed. "Everyone will just think it was a complication." Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. Tears pooled in her eyes. She wasn't just losing air. She was losing consciousness, losing time, losing the world, and still, no one noticed. The doctors moved around the equipment, busy, trusting the uniform Elena wore, never looking closely at the oxygen gauge. Elena's breaths came shallower, weaker, panicked. Her baby, still pushed inside her, fighting to be born, while she fought simply to stay alive. Elena gazed at the door, praying someone would walk through. But the hallway outside was silent. She was suffocating, and the woman who wanted her gone was watching her die. The door finally swung open with a sharp, echoing click, and Victor stepped inside. But he didn't look like the triumphant, confident CEO Elena once knew. His tie was crooked, his face pale, sweat dampening his collar. He rushed forward, breathless, as though he had finally realized something was terribly wrong. "Elena, I'm here," he said quickly, reaching for her hand, but Elena could barely move her fingers. Her eyes widened, pleading, trying to speak without sound. Her breaths came as faint, shallow gasps. The oxygen mask still clung to her face, useless, because Elena had nearly sealed off the flow entirely. Victor didn't see it. He saw only the woman he had neglected, now shaking and struggling. Guilt punched him, hard. He looked over his shoulder for help, and right there Elena was standing behind him, her expression carefully composed. "She's in distress," Victor said, panic tightening his voice. "Do something!" Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch soft but claiming him like property. "It happens during labor," she murmured. "Some women panic. Let the staff work." But there was something too calm, too rehearsed, in her tone. A nurse approached, ready to assist, but Elena suddenly stepped into her path, blocking her with a professional smile. Then the hallway outside stirred. The door opened again, this time slower, steady. A man walked in wearing a decorated military officer's uniform, his presence so sharp it cut the tension in the room. Broad shoulders, silvering hair, eyes that burned with years of command. The kind of man whose silence could command an entire battalion to attention. His gaze fell immediately on Elena, on her labored gasps, then on the oxygen tube, it nearly closed, then on Elena's hand, still resting near the valve. For a moment, the world held its breath. "Elena," he said, and his voice wasn't raised, but it froze every soul in the room. Elena turned, and all color drained from her face. "Pa." Her voice broke because she had not expected him to be here. Not now, not like this. She had not known Elena's emergency contact, the man who received the hospital call, the man who rushed across the city without hesitation, was her father. Colonel Mikhail Rostov walked closer. Each step was controlled, but his eyes were shaking with unspeakable disappointment. He reached Elena's bedside, his hand steady as he corrected the oxygen valve, restoring flow. Elena inhaled, and the breath that returned to her lungs felt like life being given back. The monitor stabilized. Nurses finally noticed, gasping, rushing to assist. They exchanged worried glances. How could they have missed something so obvious? Elena opened her mouth, words falling apart. I can explain." "No," Mikhail said, voice quiet, but it struck the room like a hammer. "There is no explanation for deliberately endangering a mother and child." His voice trembled, not with anger, but grief. "I raised you to protect life, not this." Victor stared at Elena as if seeing her for the very first time, truly seeing her. The admiration in his eyes extinguished into horror. His knees buckled and he clutched his head. What have we done? But the answer hung in the room, thick and undeniable. They had almost killed Elena. And the man, who once loved them both, now stood at the threshold of ruin, watching the truth break everything he thought he controlled. The recovery room was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the walls themselves were trying not to disturb what had just happened. The harsh brightness of the delivery ward had been replaced with a softer light, but Elena's body still trembled, remembering the suffocating darkness. She lay propped against clean white pillows, her newborn wrapped in a small blanket against her chest. The baby's tiny breaths were steady, warm, alive, a miracle she could feel. Tears slid silently down Elena's cheeks, not from the pain of labor, not even from relief, but from the terrifying realization of how close everything had come to ending, how one moment, one human choice, could erase a life. A soft knock sounded at the door. Victor stepped in, but he didn't come close. For once, the man who commanded boardrooms, who negotiated corporate empires, looked small. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders slumped. He held his hands together as if he didn't know what to do with them. "Elena," he began, voice hoarse. "I didn't know. I didn't think she—" He stopped. The words were empty. There were no excuses, not now, not after the oxygen valve, not after the whisper of death at her ear. Elena did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the baby, tracing the tiny fingers, the fragile nails, the life that had fought to stay. "You weren't there," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier to forgive. It was tired. It was shattered. "You were supposed to be with me. With us." Victor sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, head bowed. I know I failed you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. She cut him off with a gentle shake of her head. "There is no us anymore." The words settled slowly between them, heavy, irrevocable. Victor closed his eyes and his breath trembled, but he didn't argue. Some truths couldn't be fought. He stood to leave, pausing only to look one more time at the infant, the child that should have united them, but instead revealed the depth of what had already been lost. Outside the room, down the hallway, Mikhail stood beside his daughter, Elena. She was no longer wearing her nurse's uniform. Her hands were cuffed. Her face was streaked with tears that wouldn't stop. She looked like a child again, lost and terrified. "Pa, please." Her voice cracked. "Don't let them take me. I didn't think. I just wanted him to love me. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't mean to." Mikhail's chest rose with a painful breath. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Soldiers didn't cry, but fathers did, just not always where others could see. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And love." His voice strained, breaking. "Love does not look like killing." Her knees buckled. He caught her before she fell. For one long, aching moment he held her. Not as a criminal, not as a stranger, but as his daughter. The girl he once lifted onto his shoulders. The child whose laughter once filled his home. Then, with a trembling exhale, he released her into the custody of the officers waiting nearby. Elena, holding her child, heard none of this. She sat in silence, watching the sunrise creep over the city skyline through the window. Soft light touched her face, warm and new. She kissed her baby's forehead. This was not the life she planned, but it was a second chance. A beginning. One carved out of the darkest moment she had ever faced. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. She had survived, and she would never let anyone take her breath again.